single facet. We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning. And you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore.
Welcome to episode number 13 of the MMA Rundown podcast. Colby Covington just won and earned himself a title shot against Kamaru Usman. Before I get into the topics, one more little celebratory note for Colby Covington. So Colby did get the win over Robbie Lawler. Really big fight for him. As I mentioned before, he likely earns himself a title shot now. He also probably earns himself a lot of new fans. That's one of the main topics I'll be covering this week. As far as all the other topics go, so obviously at the jump we'll be talking about Colby's big win. From there we'll talk about how Colby was promoted prior to this fight. So I had a bit of an issue with how the UFC handled the promotion of this. They really leaned into the side of him helping out the military more so than him having a close relationship with the sitting president and his family. We're going to talk about the welterweight title picture now that Colby did get the win there. Talk about the other fights on the UFC Newark card. Herb Dean had a couple fights on that Newark card where fighters went unconscious on him. I'll talk about whether or not I think he did a good job in those fights or not. We've got UFC Uruguay coming up this coming weekend, so I'll go through the whole card there, including the debut of Rodolfo Vieira, which is going to be its own separate topic. We'll talk about Eddie Alvarez and Mighty Mouse returning to ONE FC. Both of them got wins. Cris Cyborg is now officially a free agent. Their UFC is not going to extend a matching period to her after her PR war with her lasted a little over a week. And Demian Maia and Ben Askren, a fight I've been hoping to see for a while, appears to be on the verge of getting booked. It looks like October 26th is going to be the date for that, but I'll talk about that as well. So just right off the jump with Colby Covington, there's a lot to cover here. It's tough to decide whether to handle it from a promotional side or a sporting side. I guess I'll go sports first because we just had the fight itself. So leading into this fight, I was concerned for Colby for a couple of reasons. I had heard that he had gotten the better of Lawler in training, but one of the things that happens when you have grapplers versus strikers in training oftentimes is that a striker isn't going to go full blast on a grappler all the time. They're not going to knock a guy unconscious every single time they spar, whereas a grappler can pretty much go full blast every time. So if the grappler does have the edge on the striker in training, sometimes that's just because the grappler is the better fighter. But sometimes it's just because of the positions they're putting in training. Oftentimes you're putting specific positional drills or the sparring you have, you're not actually trying to injure each other, whereas in a fight you are, and you have the 4-ounce gloves rather than the 10-ounce gloves, the 12-ounce gloves, or even 14s, depending on where you're sparring or who you're sparring with. So there were some questions about how this fight would go for Colby. Lawler is typically very tough for wrestlers to deal with. One of the reasons why he's very tough for wrestlers to deal with is because he's extremely hard to take down. Once you do take him down, he's very hard to keep down. So both from a physical standpoint of actually doing the work to take him down, but then also the mental standpoint of you do all that work and then he gets right back up. It can be exhausting. Now, granted, Colby's known for having a great gas tank, but even if you have a great gas tank, 25 minutes is a long time. And if you're unsuccessful in taking Robbie down, he can also just circle around to your back and get a good grappling position on you. We saw the Ben Askren fight where Askren tried to take him down, took a sloppy shot, and ended up getting slammed on his head. So Lawler's capable of doing that. But then also, eventually, your shots are going to get a little bit more sloppy, and he's going to be able to find some openings in the striking. So for Colby, the test here was going to be, could he avoid the big shots in the striking ranges? And could he be successful enough with his grappling where his striking could be more effective, where when they actually are on the feet, he's going to be okay? And really, that's kind of how it worked out for Colby. He was very effective in getting takedowns early on. Didn't do a whole lot when he was down. He decided to wrestle him more so than actually try to grapple and finish. So there were a couple times where he would get his arm around, I guess it wasn't technically underneath the chin, but he would get his arm around Robbie's neck. But he would never sink both hooks in. And I think that has to do with him training with Robbie before. And knowing that if you actually do commit to the hooks on Robbie and he gets away, there's a good chance the hand's up on top, and you do not want Robbie on top of you, especially with 4-ounce gloves. So Colby was just making the calculated decision of, look, I'm probably not going to finish this choke here. I'll kind of put it there and see if something comes up, but I'm not going to risk giving up a bad position just to try to finish Robbie here early on, and he didn't. But on the same token, Robbie was able to get up a lot. So even though Colby got a lot of the takedowns, he wasn't really able to keep him there all that well. But getting 10 takedowns still, it's enough to force Robbie to have to worry about that shot. And when he could see that Robbie was starting to prepare for the shot and starting to throw some uppercuts, Colby was stringing together some longer combinations and using the threat of the wrestling to really make his striking more effective. As the fight went on, threw a lot of volume strikes, wasn't exactly trying to knock him out with every shot. There were some shots that he threw that could potentially knock a guy out or at least hurt him. Robbie's face was definitely banged up after the fight, but there was a mix of volume and then also some power, kind of like what you would see from a Diaz brother. But all in all, very impressive that he stood as much as he did with Robbie, threw as many strikes as he did. Took a couple hard shots here and there, but rolled with a lot of them too. So from a striking standpoint, he looked a lot better than I expected him to. From a wrestling standpoint, I was surprised that he was able to take Robbie down so many times. Had some trouble holding him down there, but it seemed like he knew what to expect from having trained with Robbie before, knowing where Robbie's good and where Robbie is a little less dangerous, and was able to stay safe and got himself a decision win. And in doing so is now, at least for the moment, supposed to be the next guy up for a title fight. Now, I did mention in the podcast last week and in my other previews for this before that I was pretty sure that Masvidal was getting the next title shot, and my reasoning was I didn't know if Colby was going to win this fight, so let's just assume that Colby had lost this fight. Well, then Robbie's probably not getting the title shot because he just had that loss to Askren. If you look at Colby, if Colby does win the fight, he has to win it in such a manner where he's healthy enough to come back, and November is that date they were looking at. So now the question is, we're in early August. He has pretty much all of August, all of September, and all of October to prepare, and then early November is when that fight would be. Is that going to give him enough time to prepare for Usman? He's saying that, at least in terms of what he has to look for, they're going to have to do some medicals and see if there are any issues. When you throw 500 strikes, you're probably going to punch the forehead a handful of times, so you never know if there are going to be broken fingers or any part of like a broken hand. Doesn't seem like that was the case. He didn't mention anything about it. Did throw a lot of leg kicks. Some of those kicks got hit by, or some of those kicks hit elbow. Some of those kicks got checked. So did he injure his foot or leg at any point? That's hard to say. Even if he did, I don't know that anything would have been serious enough where it's going to stop him from fighting in 3 months. That cut that he was talking about, that could be an issue because they're going to have to, what he said is they're going to have to cut it back open again and then have a plastic surgeon take care of it so that it's better healed than it is right now. So that could take some time, but it seems like even still, a lot of these injuries or potential injuries might not take any more than like 3 to 4 weeks, and if that's the case, that still leaves him about 8 weeks of preparation for Usman, and I think for him that should be enough. So with that being said, it looks like Covington is going to get the next title fight unless Usman tries to get funny about the dates and tries to force the title fight any sooner or pushes in any other direction where he doesn't think that Colby's going to accept the fight. But as of right now, it seems like Colby versus Usman is the fight to make. It was an interesting choice by them to bring Usman on with the analyst there to break down the fights because you knew that he was eventually going to have to confront Colby and they were going to have to talk to each other. That was a pretty heated moment. They had a handful of security guards there. Nothing really got too violent, but you could definitely tell the two don't like each other, and you would assume that if these guys do fight each other, that post-fight show is going to be using the promotion for it. So with that being the case, looks like Colby does have the next title shot. As far as some other of the promotional stuff around Colby, one of the things that I just included there was that walkout song where he took Kurt, or I wouldn't say take, but he was allowed to use Kurt Angle's walkout song. He talked to Kurt Angle about it and gotten the okay on it. Really smart. He knows that a lot of people don't like him. He likes being the heel, and the fact that the fans played along with it and chanted "You suck" as the music went along was pretty awesome and a pretty cool throwback to childhood when Kurt Angle was one of the top WWE wrestlers. So that was pretty cool. It was also very interesting that he actually got the Trumps to attend. So he got Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., and then Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is Donald Trump. I think she's a Fox News analyst and Donald Trump's current girlfriend. So pretty cool of him to be able to get people that big a name. If you could imagine someone else, even if you don't like Trump, just imagine if someone got Chelsea Clinton to attend their fight, or if they got Sasha and Malia Obama to attend their fight. That's still a pretty big deal and a pretty cool thing. So he got that to go. There was that post-fight interview where he had that line where he was saying that Robbie Lawler should have learned from Matt Hughes and that you have to get out of the train tracks when the train is coming through, and then he was saying the Trump train and the Colby train. That's obviously a reference to Matt Hughes, who suffered a life-altering injury, I would say, when he got hit by a train. It seems like at this point he's kind of living a normal life, but he's obviously not at the same functional. He's obviously not functioning the same way that he was before then. So there was a lot of interesting discussions about whether or not Colby went too far with that. There were people saying, well, Hughes survived, so it's okay to make it the joke because he didn't actually die from it. There were people who were saying, I don't like Matt Hughes because he's been accused of X, Y, and Z, so therefore he's a bad person and he deserves to have that joke made about him. Some people are just like, hey, look, Colby's just trying to draw heat. He knows that's a really hot statement to make, so it just is what it is. So a lot of different views on it. I don't know really where I fall on it. Matt Hughes did put out a little thing on Instagram where he was just like, yeah, that's part of the fight game. People talk trash about each other. You gotta have thick skin. So it didn't seem like he was all that bothered by it. I think because he survived, it makes it a little bit easier. Had Matt Hughes died, and you have his family who's just like, oh my gosh, we lost our father and we lost our husband, and Colby's making a joke about it. I think at that point it'd be an issue, but because he survived, I think it sort of takes the sting off of it a little bit and just makes it a really good heel line rather than something that crosses the line and goes too far. But either way, that's a good line for people. If they don't like him, they're going to dislike him even more, and if they are starting to like him, that might be something that they find really funny and kind of endearing about that. And then after the fight, he then met up with Eric Trump, Kimberly Guilfoyle, and Donald Trump Jr. And while he was meeting up with them, Eric had a call from the president and gave the phone over to Colby. And Colby had then talked to Donald Trump afterwards with a bit of a celebratory phone call. But then even prior to the fight, Don Jr. tweeted about the fight. Donald Trump tweeted about Colby Covington prior to the fight. I don't believe there was any post-fight tweet unless there's something that's going to be coming up after I film this or after I record this. But even still, pretty cool for Colby to get that. You almost wonder, it was a pretty rough weekend in American politics in that there were a couple really big shootings. So Trump went from just kind of tweeting about things he likes to having a tweet about thoughts and prayers for the communities that were affected. So maybe at that point there was a missed opportunity for Colby to get a little bit more press, but he still got a lot of really good press there. You'd have to figure that if he does return to the White House as he said he would, he's probably going to get some more press from the political press there. He's getting at least some kind of crossover support. He's got a lot of heat around him right now. I think that Usman fight, now it's a very big fight. I think it's because of the fact that he had the Lawler fight, that Usman fight is going to be worth a lot more than it was prior. I think the UFC is going to make a lot more money, or I guess in this case, ESPN Plus is going to make a lot more money on that fight now because of the Lawler fight than they would have if they had just waited for Colby to get ready by November and then just made the fight straight up. So in that way, bit of a calculated risk, but it seems to be working out for everyone involved there. Back to the topic about how Colby was promoted, though. Colby, like I mentioned, he has friendships with the president. He has friendships with the president's family. And to me, it seems like that's a big opportunity to build off of because you can take it both ways. I get that Donald Trump is considered divisive. I guess really any president would be divisive. If you have a D or an R by your name, that sort of makes you divisive in today's climate. But with that being said, with Colby being so close to the Trumps, you could play the angle for Colby where it's like, oh, look at Colby, he's Trump's favorite fighter. And then the people who like Trump are like, okay, cool, I like Colby. And then you could also then play that off on Lawler and say, here's Lawler, he's a knockout artist who has a chance to knock out Trump's favorite fighter. And then the people who keep D's by their name at least would find that to be a little bit more appealing and would have reason to cheer for Robbie Lawler and still want to see what happens. Because the thought of actually tuning in and watching Robbie Lawler knock out Colby Covington in front of the Trumps, if you don't like the Trump family, that'd be a pretty cool idea. And if the Trumps are coming to the next fight against Kamaru Usman, I think people are going to be interested in seeing that anyway. So to me, there's a really good opportunity to promote that aspect of it. The UFC didn't promote that aspect of it at all. Instead, the promotion they did with Colby, on one front, it was just talking about how good of a guy he is because he goes to visit the troops at the, I forgot what it was. It was a Navy ship in New York, though. They're talking about how good of a guy he is, though. And then he was talking about, oh, I'm just team captain of American Top Team, and Robbie Lawler left, and I'm just trying to avenge ATT. And in a way, it sort of like made him out to be like kind of like a nice guy, when in reality he's trying to take the heel character. He's doing a great job as a heel. A lot of people just absolutely can't stand him, and the promotion wasn't really building off the heel aspect as much as it was just trying to like make him look like a good guy, which I don't think was a great idea. So hopefully, for the next fight with Usman, they really do build it. They really do dig into the side of him being close to Trump. They kind of dig on that political aspect, make it so that Colby's Trump's fighter. So if you're a Trump guy, then you want to cheer for Colby, and if you don't like Trump, then well, Kamaru Usman's kind of like your perfect anti-Trump type of guy, where Kamaru himself doesn't like Trump, but then also, in theory, you've got like this big muscular black guy who just wants to beat up Colby. So in a way, if you're trying to promote to people who don't like Trump, Kamaru could be the perfect guy for you to say, hey, look, here's going to be the guy who's going to beat up Trump's guy right in front of Trump's family. Donald Trump may be in attendance, even if he isn't, he's going to be watching, and he can really make a statement and send a message. So there's a lot of opportunity for promotion there. I hope the UFC does a good job there and actually does play into that, because it seems like it'd be a waste not to. It was also weird that they didn't really play into the fact that he went to the Oval Office and was the first champion to do so, or even just fighter to do so, or active fighter to do so. So hopefully promotion for the next coming fight's better than this one. I'm not sure what the ratings are going to be on this, but whatever they are, I don't think they're going to be as good as they should have been because the promotion wasn't done properly. Next aspect is how the welterweight title picture plays out. So as I mentioned, it looks like Colby is going to get the next title shot. It looks like the injuries sustained before and after the fight aren't going to be enough to keep him away keep him away through November. So it looks like he'll get the next title shot. That would then make the fight for Jorge Masvidal likely to be against Leon Edwards. There's talk of him wanting to fight Conor, but I don't see Conor returning by that point. I think Conor's eyes right now are on the lightweight division. So putting him up against a welterweight doesn't seem to make the most sense. So it seems like Edwards versus Masvidal is going to be a good title eliminator at that point. What happens with Tyron Woodley is unclear. I believe Woodley was actually supposed to fight Robbie Lawler and he got injured. So Woodley versus Covington is a fight that would make a lot of sense for Colby's first defense if he does get the win. If he doesn't, even still, Woodley had a really good title reign, so him being close to a title shot would make a lot of sense. I don't know if they're going to put him against Masvidal rather than Leon Edwards. So that remains to be seen. There's some other guys who are floating around who are pretty good as well, but it seems like the top 5 in that division right now is Colby, Usman, Woodley, Edwards, and Masvidal, and you're probably going to get some sort of mix of the bottom 3 after Colby and Usman fight. As for the rest of the card, there were a lot of fights that were very good to watch, although on paper this wasn't the most impressive card. They really did need Robbie and Colby to headline it to bring it far. So in the co-main event, we had Jim Miller versus Clay Guida. Jim Miller won this fight by guillotine choke 58 seconds in. Miller landed a good shot, then Guida landed a really big right hand. Miller was a little bit hurt, threw a big left hand of his own. After stunning Clay Guida, Guida jumped in. Got caught in a guillotine. It seemed like a bit of an unconventional finish by Miller, but he was able to get a tight enough squeeze where he was able to put Guida out, and he got the victory. You had Nasrat Haqparast versus Joaquim Silva. Haqparast started kind of slow, was just kind of getting his reads, and early in the second round he was able to land a huge overhand left. Got Silva to attempt to parry a straight left and ended up coming around the parry and caught him, dropped him, and then finished him on the ground. Gerald Meerschaert and Trevin Giles was a pretty competitive fight. Giles was having some success on the ground, got a little bit overconfident there, and then in a scramble going for a single leg in the third round, he ended up getting caught in a high elbow guillotine and got choked out. You had Scott Holtzman versus Dong Yun Ma. Holtzman and Ma were just getting after it. It was a great fight. Both guys were throwing bombs on each other. Holtzman ended up landing a handful of right hands that ended up swelling up Ma's eyes to the point where he got stopped after the second round. They just couldn't send him back out there with his eye being as swollen as it was. And the first fight on the main card was Darko Stosic losing to Kennedy and Chekwu. Bit of a weird fight in that had there been no penalties, Stosic actually would have won a split decision here. But he lost 2 points for 2 different penalties that were for low kicks. So he had hit three low blows on Kennedy throughout the fight. First one was just a warning, and then the last 2 were both points. So in losing those 2 points, he ended up losing enough points to lose a decision here. On the prelims, we had Mickey Gall versus Salim Touhari. Gall ended up winning that fight 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Bit of a rough fight for Gall. I think the last fight with Diego Sanchez was pretty rough for him too. He's just one of those guys where he sort of got pushed into the UFC a little bit too quickly because they needed someone to fight against CM Punk. It was kind of weird that they'd made that decision anyway because Gall at the time was a brown belt, Punk was a white belt. Punk's best aspect was his jiu-jitsu as a white belt. So why they would put him up against a brown belt, not quite sure. I made some good money on the bet there, but that's beside the point. But ever since then, he's had a long road to catch up in terms of getting his wrestling up to speed, getting his striking up to speed, and he just isn't quite there yet. With his wrestling, it seems like he's decent at getting in on a leg, but it's almost like getting in on a leg is like winning one battle, and then he has to like reset his mind and then go through the next battle of actually like finishing the takedown. And as he's like trying to set his mind on the second battle, he's just not winning it. So getting guys down to the ground is an issue for him right now. His striking, he swings hard. He can definitely hit with some power, but it's kind of weird. A lot of times when you watch, especially when they show in slow motion, it looks like his wrist is bending backwards when he lands his punches. Like he's not snapping into it or curling his punches in, but rather his wrist is bending backward. So there's definitely more to be desired on that end. And from the jiu-jitsu standpoint, yes, it's good. I believe he's a black belt now, but there are a lot of other black belts in the UFC welterweight division. It's not as though he's an especially talented grappler compared to the others. So for him, it seems like he's probably not a UFC caliber fighter right now in that welterweight division. Yes, he's beating some decent guys, but it almost feels like it would make more sense for him to fight on a lower stage, sort of build up those skills, especially in the striking and the wrestling, and then come back to the UFC. Because you really can't hang on to a guy like him for too long before you start putting him against guys who are just going to actually just absolutely run through him. I don't believe that fight against Diego Sanchez was really that surprising. I expected Sanchez to beat Gall, and I expected a good Gall to come out there. Gall says that he wasn't quite at his best, but even still, I think Diego's definitely better than him, and we just saw what happened to Diego against Chiesa. So For Mickey Gall, yes, he gets a win here. It probably buys him a little bit more time in the UFC, but I think he really needs to take some time right now and really improve his game before he starts trying to make a run through the UFC welterweight division. Then we have Antonina Shevchenko getting her first submission victory of her career over Lucy Pudilova. She's someone who, having her sister Valentina have the same last name as her has definitely sped up her progression through the sport in terms of promotional standpoint. I don't think she's anywhere near as good as Valentina is. Her striking doesn't seem to be as effective, and obviously her grappling hasn't been quite as good, but this was a good fight for her. She did have a really close armbar attempt. There were a couple little technical details that were missing that allowed her opponent to get free and not get submitted, but ended up catching a rear naked choke while defending a takedown in the second round and was able to put her opponent out. So good finish for her there. Jordan Espinosa versus Matt Schnell. I'd expected Espinosa to win this fight, but Schnell is a very tough fighter, pretty good striking and pretty crafty off his back. When Espinosa had shot in for a takedown, Schnell went for an arming guillotine, didn't quite have it. But as he was letting go of the guillotine, he was taking advantage of Espinosa trying to defend the guillotine and was able to sneak his leg over, get into a triangle, and did a fantastic job of cutting his angle on it and getting a finish. Really, really technical, really well done, and awesome win for him. It looks like he's not terribly far away from title contention at flyweight, especially since it's such a shallow division right now. We had Lauren Murphy get a knockout over Mara Romero Barella. It wasn't the most exciting fight for most of it, but in the third round, Murphy landed a big uppercut that stunned Barella. Ended up getting clinched with her, landed a huge knee, and then finishing her on the ground after that. We had Claudio Silva, who's been fighting in the UFC for I think about 5 years, although he's been injured for a lot of that time, is 5-0. He had a fight against Cole Williams, a guy from the Midwest area, Wisconsin, and also he's been around in Iowa. But Silva was able to get the fight to the ground and has a pretty big grappling advantage there and was able to use that and get a rear naked choke, or I guess technically a neck crank. And then in the first fight of the card, Miranda Granger defeated Hannah Goldie. Not a very exciting fight, but Granger was able to use her range and outstrike Goldie for most of that fight. So a couple of the fights, though, there were 3 different fights where someone went out. So Trevin Giles went out on a choke, Clay Guida went out on a choke, and Pudilova went out on a choke. In 2 of those fights, Herb Dean was the referee. Now it's kind of ironic that Herb Dean was the referee in a couple fights where guys went unconscious on chokes, given that Robbie Lawler was the main event, and Robbie Lawler's last fight was the one where Herb Dean had called it early before Robbie had gone out. So if we look at the 2 fights that Herb Dean had played a role in, he was in the co-main event with Jim Miller and Clay Guida. Was he at fault there? I think one of the things, and this happened in all 3 of those instances, that's difficult, is that as a referee, whether it's MMA or grappling, one of the hardest things to have to deal with is a choke where the head is buried because you can't see the face and it's harder to tell if the guy's out. So in all of those instances, the head was buried. In the Jim Miller Clay Guida situation, again, Guida's head is buried in the guillotine choke. Trevin Giles and Gerald Mearshart, it was a little less so on the high elbow guillotine, but even still, the head still was kind of facing down. You really couldn't see a whole lot there. So for the Miller and Guida situation, I guess you could say that Herb checked a couple more times than he needed to, but again, better safe than sorry in that situation, I guess. With a choke, having someone hold on to it for 3 seconds after someone goes out rather than 5 seconds after someone goes out isn't a major deal. When you start getting into like the 30 seconds and a minute issue, that's when it's a really big deal. But I don't think that Clay Guida is any worse off now than he otherwise would have been because of how Herb Dean handled it. So I didn't have an issue with how Herb Dean handled the situation with Miller and Guida. As far as the Giles and Mearshart one, that was just unfortunate. Because again, when you're looking for a buried head choke, you can't always look for the tap, because sometimes when you're looking for the tap or you're looking for the free hand, you're not paying attention whether or not the guy goes out. And the guy goes out and his hand still isn't moving. If you just take that as, oh, he's not tapping it, oh, he's okay, then you can just be sitting there for a while the guy's already unconscious. So it looked like Herb Dean was trying to look more for signs of him being unconscious rather than a tap. So in doing that where he was positioned, he didn't see the tap. Now we saw it because of where the camera was positioned, but we have to think about where he's positioned rather than the camera. So he didn't see the tap. Giles went out. After he went out, did the check for it, saw that he was out, stopped the fight. It's unfortunate that Giles did, from his standpoint, he tapped before he went out. He shouldn't, in theory, if you tap before you go out, you probably shouldn't have to go out. In that case, he did. Mearshart did what he had to do. He held on until the ref pulled him off, which is technically what you're supposed to do. So can't really fault him for that. But just a bit of unfortunate positioning. It's a lot easier to stop a choke when you can actually see the head and you can see into the fighter's eyes than it is when their head's buried and you don't know if they're going to tap or how they're going to tap. So as far as the criticism on Herb Dean, really didn't have too big of an issue with him there. I think he handled it fine. Could he have been a little bit earlier in hindsight? Yes, but it's not like he was that late where it's going to cause any significant health issues to the guys who were affected by it. So with UFC Newark out of the way, let's talk about UFC Uruguay, which is the upcoming event. This is going to be on ESPN Plus, and if you have ESPN Plus, you are going to be getting a free title fight. That title fight is going to be between Valentina Shevchenko and Liz Carmouche. Apparently this fight happened a long time ago, and Carmouche got the victory. Shevchenko has improved a lot since then. I'm sure her grappling is significantly different now than it was back then. So in that way, it'll be interesting to see how this matchup works. One of the things that interests me most about this matchup is that a lot of these women's flyweight fighters, not only are they just not better than Valentina, but they aren't even like better in one area of fighting. Like they're not better strikers, they're not better in the takedown range, they're not better at actually grappling on the mat. So it's just like, all right, well, how are they going to win? Like Jessica I didn't think was better than Valentina really anywhere. Like, you could argue that maybe wrestling, but as far as Valentina goes, her MMA wrestling is very effective. So at least in this case with Carmouche is a legit 10th planet black belt on the ground. Has decent wrestling. I don't know that her wrestling is significantly better than Valentina Shevchenko's, but I'd say her jiu-jitsu definitely is. So in that way, you could at least say, hey, look, there is a path to victory for Liz Carmouche here, and it'll be interesting to see if she's actually able to get the fight to the ground and bring it there. Shevchenko, for the longest time, was not known for being a power striker, more of a volume striker and a counter striker at that. The knockout of Jessica I has probably changed that in a lot of people's eyes with how vicious it was. But even still, to me, this fight is a lot more competitive than people are expecting, because I think after that Jessica I fight, people are just expecting Shevchenko to murder everyone in the division. And Carmouche, to me, is a legitimate challenge. She may be able to get this fight to the mat a couple different times. Whether or not she's able to finish when she does get there, I don't know about that. But is it possible for her to win a round or two here? I definitely think it is. At the end of the day, I think Shevchenko is going to win this fight and win on the feet for the most part, but I expect this to actually be a good fight. I don't think that Shevchenko is just going to run through her like I expected with Carmouche, or like I expected with Jessica I. In the co-main event, we get a bit of a treat with Vicente Luque and Mike Perry. Both of these guys are trying to work their way up the welterweight ladder. Both of them are extremely aggressive strikers, very good finishers. You'd figure Luque has the advantage on the ground, but I don't know if this fight's going to go to the ground. I expect it to probably be standing for the most part, at which point it can be a bit of a toss-up. I think Luque should be favored. I think he is favored, but either way, as a fan, this is just going to be a fun fight to watch. Fight before that is going to be Luis Garagori versus Humberto Bondone. I've seen Bondone fight a handful of times. He's pretty exciting. I don't know anything about his opponent. We got Volkan Ozdemir versus Ilir Latifi. This is a top 10 light heavyweight matchup that's going to be on that main card there. Not sure that this has a huge effect on the title picture, because Latifi is coming off a handful of recent losses. Or Ozdemir is. Latifi also had that recent loss to Corey Anderson. But whoever wins this fight, in all likelihood, is going to be fighting a pretty big name in the division next, whether it's a guy coming off a loss or whether it's just another up-and-comer. So, pretty important fight for the 205 division. Fight prior to that, you have Oscar Pereira versus Rodolfo Vieira. I talked about Rodolfo a couple weeks ago, and I'm definitely going to talk about him more now because he's a guy who I'm extremely excited to watch. He is a 5-time IBJJF Gi Jiu-Jitsu champion. IBJJF is obviously the biggest organization for Gi Jiu-Jitsu. He also won ADCC in 2015. I also had mentioned in a video that I'd done recently that he had a Gi match with the 2018 world champion, defeated him in 2018. So even though he didn't win the world title that year, he's still at the top of the game and has elite level jiu-jitsu. He's training with Jacare Souza right now, so it's pretty cool for a guy like him who's a middleweight elite jiu-jitsu competitor coming over to MMA to be training under Jacare. That's a great guy to learn from. So there's a chance that maybe sometime down the line that Rodolfo Vieira will be the new age Jacare Souza, and this is going to be his UFC debut. So really exciting fight right there. And then also on the main card is Enrique Barzola versus Bobby Moffett. On the prelims, they have Rafael Pessoa versus Cyril Gagne. Tisha Torres is fighting against Marina Rodriguez. Rogerio Bontorin versus Rolian Paiva. Geraldo de Freitas versus Chris Gutierrez. Talia Santos versus Ariane Carnelosi. Rodrigo Vargas versus Alex da Silva. Gilbert Dorino Burns versus Alexei Kunchenko, which is actually just a gigantic fight. I don't know how this ended up right there. It's a welterweight fight, but Dorino is a guy who's been floating around the bottom of the top 15 of the lightweight division, seems to be moving up in weight, but he's a former jiu-jitsu world champion, 15-3, who's going to be fighting against 20-0 Alexei Kunchenko. So that's the second fight on the card, so make sure you catch that one. And the first fight on the card is going to be Veronica Macedo versus Poliana Viana. So pretty good overall card. a lot of people you probably haven't heard of yet that are more local to Brazil and that South American region, but there are definitely some interesting fights that are going to be coming up on that card. Back to Rodolfo. I kind of covered most of what I want to cover with him, just mentioning that he is a 5-time IBJJF champion. He is a ADCC champion in 2015, which is in Nogi. It's a submission wrestling tournament, but it's effectively the guys who usually win are jiu-jitsu guys. And then also has that training partner he's a training partner of Jacare Souza. They're both middleweights. He's a lot younger than Jacare, about 10 years younger than Jacare. His striking has a ways to go. His coach, Julian Williams, seems to think that he's like 2 years away from title contention. From a grappling standpoint, I guess because Jacare's in the division, you probably wouldn't say that he's like far and away the best guy in that division for jiu-jitsu, but he probably is the best guy in the division for jiu-jitsu. I'd assume that at this point in time, he's probably better than Jacare on the ground. Anyone else, they're not going to want to go anywhere near the ground with him. He's a pretty good wrestler for jiu-jitsu, so there are jiu-jitsu guys who come in and they just like to play off their back and they just pull guard. That's not Rodolfo at all. Rodolfo was known for being able to take guys down, get on top, and just pass. So his style transfers very well to MMA. Has some pretty big wins in Russia, and now he's coming over to the UFC. This is his debut, and I expect it to be pretty spectacular from him. And if he does get the win, he can move up the ladder pretty quickly and take out some pretty impressive guys. So definitely keep your eyes out for Rodolfo Vieira. A couple other things to talk about. So we have Eddie Alvarez and Mighty Mouse Johnson taking new fights in one. So Mighty Mouse won his first fight, got to the semifinals of his tournament, fought in the semifinals just this week, got another victory there. It was a bit of a close fight, went against a really good grappler, had his back taken at one point, but he was able to control most of the fight and ended up getting the unanimous decision win there. Eddie Alvarez had a much tougher fight, so he had lost his debut to Timothy Nastyukin, fought against Edward Folliang this time around. Folliang was giving him a lot of problems on the feet, particularly with the leg kicks. Ended up dropping him with a leg kick, and when he dropped him, Folliang just went all out trying to get a finish on the ground. Got a little bit too aggressive and a little bit careless, I would say. So he got in a position where Alvarez had his right hand, he had wrist control in his right hand, and had the left shin and the right bicep. And rather than try to pummel through and fight that grip, he just kind of let that grip be taken and then used his left hand just to punch. So while he was doing that, Alvarez had his right shin across the belly. Took a couple punches, hooked underneath the leg, and got a sweep right into top of half guard. And then once Eddie Alvarez was on top of half guard, did a really good job of securing a crossface. Didn't secure the underhook, but didn't really need it. And then with that crossface, he used his free right hand to push through the knee, trying to pass through. Folliang tried to buck, was unsuccessful. Alvarez got mount, and then from mount, Folliang turtled real quickly. Alvarez took the back, flattened him out immediately, and was able to sink in a rear naked choke and get a really fantastic finish there. Really great jiu-jitsu from Eddie Alvarez. And I know a lot of people don't think of Alvarez as a jiu-jitsu guy, but he's been training this entire time. Even though he hasn't had to rely on his jiu-jitsu all that much, this was an example where he needed it, and boy did it come through for him. It was a really cool one for him, and really cool one for people who like watching jiu-jitsu and MMA. Another big story is Cris Cyborg being set free. So, as I mentioned last week, after the win at UFC 240, Cris Cyborg just went on an absolute PR assault on the UFC. Was sending out that video of Dana White saying that she looked like Vanderlei Silva in a dress. Also, the video from Joe Rogan's podcast where he was saying that she would have to cut her dick off to make weight. And was just trying to say, oh, well, look at the UFC, they're bullies, they're sexually harassing me, and they're doing all these awful things. And was just going out of her way to try to get any bad press that she possibly could towards the UFC. It's pretty clear that she didn't want to resign. It seemed like the only thing that would make her resign would be to get a fight with Amanda Nunes. That was the only thing of interest to her. But with the way she was acting, it was clear that this probably wasn't going to work out. And with her making such a great effort to get bad PR for the UFC, she was successful in that. Got a lot of journalists on Twitter to go at the UFC on that. Also got a report on Outside the Lines, which is the ESPN show, which is also the UFC's biggest local partner in the U.S. So that wasn't particularly good for the UFC. So they just had enough of it and decided that rather than hold her out for the whole 3-month period to match any offers, that they would just cut her free and let her sign somewhere else, and they had no plan to re-sign her. As far as what I think about this, I mean, look, for the UFC, because of the fact that Amanda Nunes beat her, and Amanda Nunes beat her so badly, it makes it a little bit easier for them to have to stomach this. Had she beaten Nunes, it'd be a lot tougher for them to let her go. So at least in that way it works out. Also, the flyweight division isn't that strong of a division. The UFC is in a bit of a tricky spot in that, as a promotion, there are a handful of different ways you can handle yourself as a promotion. So on one standpoint, as a promotion, what you can do is you can just say, look, our goal is to have the top fighters no matter what at every single weight class. Or you can just say, hey, look, our goal is, look, we're a company, we're just trying to make money, so we're going to find whatever type of fight can sell, and we're just going to do that. Or you can try to find like a bit of an in-between spot. And really, I think that's where the UFC is, that they're in an in-between spot. So they do their best to have the best fighters. But to a certain point, you just aren't going to be able to keep them. In some cases, you're just not going to win the bids for them against other companies. In other cases, you just realize that a fighter, though they may be one of the better fighters in the world, they're not going to be good enough to warrant the cost it's going to take to keep them. So you look at the fighters like Elias Theodore or John Fitch or Jake Shields, who've been released while they were top 15 fighters. What you'd have there is that the UFC, they'll kind of keep you around as long as you can look like you're in the title picture. But if you're not in the title picture and you're not making the money, then at some point they'll just say, all right, well, look, we'd rather have someone who's a little worse than you, but is at least going to be exciting, is at least going to help us sell our product. So as far as where Cyborg fits in there, Cyborg's definitely an exciting fighter. But if you are going to have a featherweight division and you have Amanda Nunes on your roster, I guess you don't necessarily need to have Cyborg to say that you have the best women's featherweight on your roster. But even still, it would have been better for the UFC to be able to keep her. But with the way she was acting, it didn't seem like it'd be a great fit to keep her around much longer. So for them, I think you kind of had to let her go after she just went on her absolute PR assault against them. If her goal was to get an apology, she probably could have handled it a lot better. For one, the Vanderlei Silva address comment came before she ever signed with Zuffa. So if that bothered her so much and she needed an apology before signing, she could have gotten it then. The Joe Rogan thing, from what I had heard, she had requested an apology and gotten it at that point. So for her to bring that back up now as if that was something new, it seems to me more like she was just trying to cause trouble for the UFC than she was actually like looking for something to be made whole with her. And in that way, if that's how she's going to be acting, the UFC kind of has to let her go and just has to move on. They could have decided just to hang on to her for the whole 3-month period and make sure she can't work during that time. By them releasing her, I guess it goes both ways. On one way, you could say, oh, they were being nice because they're releasing her now and they're not making her wait the whole 3-month period. The other side is that if they did hang on to her for 3 months, you would have to imagine that her PR with the UFC would continue for the entire duration of it. So by cutting her loose, they're also saving themselves some trouble with her, not just going on a full PR attack for the whole 3 months. So maybe they did a good thing. Maybe they just did what they felt was in their best interest. You could argue either way, but to me, with how Cyborg was handling herself after the victory over Felicia Spencer, it only made sense that these guys parted ways, and it's good that they actually have parted ways and they're done. Last topic to talk about is Demian Maia versus Ben Askren. After Ben Askren had lost, there were a lot of people talking about how Darren Till versus Ben Askren was the fight to make, that both of them were coming off of losses, that Darren Till and Ben Askren had some heat already, so why not make that fight? I felt like at the time I was in the minority when I was saying, no, this is absolutely not the fight to make. The fight to make right now is Demian Maia, and there are a handful of reasons why. The biggest reason to me is that this was the best time and best possible time to make that fight, because they're both pretty close in the rankings. I think, at least as of now, the rankings may have changed recently with a couple big welterweight fights that have recently come up. But at the time I made that video, I think it was 9 and 11 where they were both ranked, so they're both ranked pretty closely to each other. For Ben Askren, a fight that a lot of people have wanted to see for a long time, is him against an elite world level jiu-jitsu guy. So in that case, in having that fight against Demian Maia, you could get that fight against a world level jiu-jitsu guy. There aren't a whole lot of other world level jiu-jitsu guys at the top of the welterweight division. No one's ranked as high as Maia. Maia's a guy who's talking about how he only wants 3 fights left in his career, so there's not going to be a whole lot of time where you can find or where you can make that Demian Maia matchup. So if you're going to make Maia versus Askren, you kind of have to make it now. And it seems like with all that being said, that was taken into account, and that's the fight that's going to be made. It's also good for Askren in that he had a really bad knockout, and Demian Maia is not a guy who's known to knock people out, although from what you hear from a lot of his opponents, his punches when he's on the ground are actually surprisingly hard. Even Carlos Condit mentioned that like he was still stung pretty badly in the Maia fight, even though it didn't look like Maia landed any huge shots. Apparently he's really strong, he hits really hard. So even if it just looks like pitter patter from the ground, it can still hurt you. But with that being the case, putting a grappler against Askren seems to make sense for his health. From a timing standpoint, this makes a lot of sense, and it's good to see that that's the fight they're going to make. So there was a rumor that this fight was going to happen. No dates were put out on it. Demian Maia just did an AMA on Twitter, and someone brought up the fight, and he said, yeah, I'd absolutely be interested in doing it. Ben Askren responded, okay, fine, how about October 26th? And then Maia's response was, sure, if we can get in touch with the UFC and they want to make that date, let's do it. So technically nothing's official yet. We don't know that October 26th is going to be the date that gets set, but at least now we have interest from both sides. We have a date that's been thrown out there. So seems like that's a fight that's going to be made. And it's a fight I definitely can't wait to see. As far as how I think it's going to go, I think Ben Askren. It's tough because that video that's out there with him and Marcelo Garcia is one that a lot of people are going to think about. It was also from 7 years ago. So for Askren, I don't think he's going to get torn up quite by Demian Maia quite like he would with Marcelo Garcia. I'm interested to see how this fight starts because typically both of those guys like to rush each other down and go for a takedown immediately. I could see Demian Maia trying to do that. But the question is, if Ben Askren's trying to take him down too, would that be an issue? Both guys want to be on top, even though Demian Maia's a good jiu-jitsu guy. Demian Maia's goal is going to be to get to the top position. So even if Askren takes him down, I don't know that Maia's going to start throwing up a bunch of submissions. I think it'd make a lot more sense and be a lot less surprising if Maia just tries to give up half guard and come up for a single from there and try to finish a single leg takedown, get a sweep, and then play his passing game from there. Whether or not he's able to get a sweep on Askren, that remains to be seen. I think he's pretty tight technically and able to do that, but Askren's a tough guy to hold down and very good at scrambling out of bad positions. So to me, I don't know how Askren's going to approach the fight. If Askren's just going to try to strike with him, if he's going to try to play a Jake Shields style game and just take him down and be safe from top, try not to get swept and try not to get submitted and just try to kill the clock. That's a possibility, but I think because there are so many ways this fight could go, it could also just be a really bad kickboxing match, which would still be kind of funny to see 15 minutes of Ben Askren striking or Demian Maia striking. So no matter where it goes, I think there's definitely something interesting there. It's going to be one of those fights where even if it's a boring fight for 10 minutes, 12 minutes, you're still wondering for the next 3 minutes, hey, is something cool about to happen? So for that reason, definitely a fight I want to see. If it's a fight I get for free, awesome. If it's a fight that ends up on pay-per-view, that's fine too. That's been one of those fights where a lot of jiu-jitsu guys for a while have been saying, hey, I'll throw a bunch of money around just to be able to see that fight, and it seems like we're pretty close to getting it, so that's pretty cool. So that covers it for this week's episode of the MMA Rundown. Again, that's episode 13. Just some housekeeping notes. This podcast is available on iTunes. It's available on Google Play. It's also hosted on Anchor, so Anchor has some links to some other podcasting apps like Pocket Cast and a handful of other ones where you can find it on. I do videos that include this whole podcast on YouTube. I also do a lot of clips that are separate from the podcast that are on YouTube. All the videos that are on YouTube are also being hosted on BitChute, so you can subscribe to me on either of those as well. That's all for this week. Have a great week. Can't wait for UFC Uruguay. Can't wait to see Rodolfo Vieira. Can't wait to see Valentina Shevchenko versus Liz Carmouche. See if that fight's going to be a lot closer than people expect. And with that being said, have a good week.